Hello, greetings. I'm Addison Pollock. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with AARP Indiana, and I am joined by Betsy Kachmar, who is the lead volunteer team leader in Fort Wayne, Indiana. How are you, Betsy?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm doing really well. Thanks for joining me today. Today, you are here for our virtual event, ADUs in Allen County. And ADUs are a big part of AARP's housing strategy. And AARP cares about housing because we care about choice. So, AARP's mission is to empower people to live as they choose as they age. And choice is a huge part of that if you're choosing how you want to live. And housing is essential to our livable communities work that we do, making sure that people have communities where they can age in place, where they can, you know, choose how they live as they age. So ADUs, what are they? They are accessory dwelling units. You will hear us use that shorthand quite a bit. These are independent housing units.
Oh, granny flats back in the day.
Yes, yes. I was about to say, yeah, secondary suites, granny flats, English basements. They have a lot of names. But we're going to call them ADUs just to simplify things. But yeah, absolutely. These are independent housing units, typically, but not always, created on single family lots through remodeling or expanding an existing home. So, yeah, as Betsy had mentioned, a lot of folks they hear them referred to as granny flats, mother-in-law suites. You think of them as like a small secondary structure behind the home, but there's actually many different types of ADUs, and I am going to share my screen really quickly to show you a um, a slide of, well, if I can find it. Actually, might not be able to. Oh, here we go. Of the different types of ADUs. So let me show you here. Just okay, never mind. It looks like it's not going to work. But if you go to aarp.org/livable, you can look up different resources called. One is called the ABCs of ADUs, and it actually has a really nice diagram of the different types of ADUs that there are. So, um, what I was going to show you in the slide was that some are detached from the primary home, so you might have that smaller secondary structure. Some are attached, so they might be directly linked to connected to that primary residence. Um, there might be an interior one that's upstairs, so more like an attic or an upper structure. There are interior lower level ones, so we commonly refer to as like a basement ADU. Above garage, actually, fun fact: Fonzie from Happy Days lived in an above garage ADU, so that's pretty cool. And then some folks also convert their garages into ADUs, and this all depends on what the local zoning code allows, and that's why we are really fortunate today to be able to share with you a an interview with a senior planner with the Allen County Planning Department here in Indiana, who talked a lot about the zoning code when it comes to ADUs. In Allen County, they only have one type of ADU that's permitted, and that is the attached ADU. So one that is attached to your home. It can only have one entrance, so the front door. The ADU cannot have a separate entrance, but it is one type of ADU where we can maybe build on that in the future. So I'm really happy that we have this interview with Patrick. He shares the legal framework for ADUs in the county and the procedural steps to build one, the intent behind the law, why the county passed this law, and then also potential opportunities to expand it, the use of ADUs. So yeah, Betsy and I will be back in just a little bit to talk more about that. But I want to remind everyone out there, if you're interested in submitting a question on Facebook, you can put your question in the comments, or if you have a nice comment, we'd love to read it on air. So go ahead and do that if you'd like. And
Right.
Betsy, did you have anything?
Well, if you think of a question for Patrick during his talk, yeah, do put that down in the comments. And if it is something we can't answer, we can certainly have him get back to you, or we can find out for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can definitely make that happen. So I hope you enjoy the video interview, and we will be back. We will be back in a few. Hello and welcome. I'm here with Patrick Rue with the Allen County Department of Planning Services. You've joined today to hear more about accessory dwelling units. We're here to discuss the legal framework and procedural considerations you should know if you're thinking about constructing an ADU on your property, or you just want to learn more about the issue. Just a reminder today, the legal framework of ADUs that we'll be discussing, it varies depending on the community you're in and even the state you're in. So today we're talking Allen County, where Fort Wayne is, as well as New Haven, Woodburn, and Huntertown, et cetera. So I'm here joined by Patrick Rue. And Patrick, before we jump into our questions, would you mind telling us a little bit more about your role with the Allen County Planning Department?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm Patrick Rue, Department of Planning Services here. We're an actual county department for Allen County. We do planning for all of the communities in Allen County, with the exception of New Haven and Leo Cedarville. So those two segments of our population would be governed by a separate zoning ordinance. And I honestly cannot say, I don't believe Leo Cedarville has specific criteria for accessory dwelling units, and I'm not certain about New Haven. So those two communities have to be contacted separately to discuss those standards. I'm the senior planner in the Permits and Enforcement Division here. So we directly review and discuss ADUs with applicants, any questions that they would have. So
wonderful. Thanks for that. So you mentioned ADUs, and this is in your wheelhouse. So first off, what type of ADUs are permitted in Fort Wayne and Allen County? We know that at AARP, like I said, it depends on this community you're in, the state you're in. Certain ADUs are permitted in certain places. So detached ADUs, attached ADUs, sometimes people have them above their garages, sometimes people have them in their backyards. But in Allen County, it's a little different. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, predominantly, the way we have a specific definition of an accessory dwelling unit, and that is specifically integrated into an existing single family residence. So, and it has to be a detached single family residence. When you get into attached single family residences, those are typically already duplexes. And so now we're looking at, if we do create an ADU on a duplex, now we're actually just looking at a multifamily structure. But as a specifically, we have one type of, we just have one ADU, and that's in what we call an accessory dwelling unit. It has to be integrated into an existing single family residence. It has to have a minimum of 300 square feet and shall include separate cooking, sleeping, and bathroom facilities. It cannot be metered separately. So you can't, have gas and electric on the ADU separate from the primary residence. The ADU has to be subordinate to the primary residence. So, for example, I know the minimum is 300 square feet, but if you have an 1,100 square foot house, you can't have a 1,200 square foot accessory dwelling unit. Now that accessory dwelling unit becomes the primary residence, and then the other area would be subordinate at that point. So we kind of have two. So typically, when we see these things, most people are asking about adding them into an existing single family house, or adding on to an existing single family house. And that's traditionally what we've seen. But in rare occasions, we do, not rare, but in some occasions, we do get a request to construct one with a new single family house. And in that scenario, what we're looking at is really, the ordinance doesn't allow that, because it says it has to be integrated into an existing single family house. So we do work around that issue. So what we do there is we'll issue a permit for this new single family house. And then we ask that they come back for a second permit after the primary residence has reached construction framing complete with the building department. Once it passes that inspection, they come in and apply for their ADU application, and then they can finish that ADU out accordingly.
So sort of a two-step process there.
Yeah, when you're doing a new, it's really not 2 steps. It's really one. It's just we require 2 permits. So
Sure.
you have to make 2 stops, really.
Gotcha.
And usually it's not the person that's typically the home buyer per se, or the person building the home is not the one applying for these permits. It's going to be their general contractor or their home builder. So that would probably just be negotiated when they do their contract.
Gotcha. Okay,
So,
great. So now I want to talk a little bit about where ADUs are permitted in the county. I know we had talked on the phone prior to this about certain districts, residential districts they're permitted in. Can you go into detail about that?
yeah, so basically, an ADU is a universally permitted use, so it's permitted in all zoning districts. However, since it has to be integrated into an existing single-family detached structure residence, those structures under today's ordinance are only permitted uses in the A districts, which are agricultural districts. And so we now have up-to-date zoning ordinances that are very similar between Huntertown, Woodburn, Grable, Monroeville, and Fort Wayne. And in the A district in those communities is called AR. It's low intensity residential. And then in the county, we have 2 A districts, which is A1 agricultural. Obviously, we have to be able to have an agricultural district in our rural unincorporated areas. And then we have an A3 district, which is estates. And the estates district still allows the agricultural, but it also allows for there's not a huge difference between the 2 districts, but we just call it the A3 estates. It's really irrelevant to what all else it permits, but both those districts permit single family residences. You're really getting into the size of the lot, and then you get into the R districts, which is R1, R2, R3 predominantly, and those pretty much carry through all of our zoning ordinances in Allen County, and the communities in Allen County. And so single family residence is permitted in all those districts. And therefore the integrated attached accessory dwelling unit is also permitted. So it's really kind of a wide scope.
So Patrick, at AARP, one of the big sort of angles that we take, or one of the focus angles that we take on ADUs is caregiving, right? So I'm a caregiver and I have an aging loved one, an aging parent that I would like to move into my property or onto my property in my house, but I need them to have a separate living space essentially, and they want a separate living space. So if I'm considering doing this, what does the building permit process look like? Can you kind of run us through like what are the steps that I need to take if I'm interested in this?
Sure. So basically, if we're adding on to an existing residence, would require from our office an improvement location permit. What we would need with that obviously is the application, a filing fee. It's a minimal filing fee. And then in addition to that, what we would need is floor plans of the existing residence and the proposed ADU, accessory dwelling unit. And the reason that we're needing that, the floor plans, is to show that it's integrated. Obviously, as I mentioned before, there's several criteria that need to be met in order for it to be classified as an accessory dwelling unit. It has to be fully integrated into the primary residence, with the primary entrance gained from within the home. It needs to be a minimum of 300 square feet. Obviously, we just said it needs to be subordinate to the primary residence, so the square footage has to be less than the primary residence. Has to have separate cooking, sleeping, and sanitation facilities, restrooms, and it cannot have separate utilities. So it's pretty straightforward. Once you receive your improvement location permit, assuming you meet these criteria, we would issue it, and then you would be looking at getting a building permit, which is a separate application, but that's your electrical, your plumbing, your structural permitting. But it's a pretty straightforward process. Usually we can turn most of our permits get turned around, usually assuming we're not overloaded, within a day. So
Oh, wow.
it's pretty
Okay.
quick turnaround.
Definitely. Great. And I don't know how long you've been with the planning department, but from your experience, roughly how many ADU applications have come through across your desk over the years?
So I've been here 20 years, and the ADU has only been in our zoning ordinance since 2014. And I'm going to say that actual applications for additions onto homes 20 to 30.
So really quickly, just kind of going back to, if I'm interested in building an ADU on my property, what's the very first step that I should take?
Obviously, to contact our department. Our website, which will flash up here on the screen, is the quickest way to get in touch with us. We have a general email address on there that you can reach us at, or you can reach us at our phone number at 260-449-7607. And we have over 20-person staff here. Everybody, is very helpful. You'll probably end up talking to me or somebody in my division regarding the ADU, and we'll get you put down the right path.
Good deal. Thanks, Patrick. And a couple more questions for you. We were at the top of this segment, we were talking a little bit about like how ADUs vary depending on where they're located. And I think a lot of times policymakers and public officials, when they're crafting a policy, there's an intent behind the policy. So in Allen County, homeowners are not able to rent out their ADU. Is that correct? Or vice versa, live in the ADU and rent out their primary dwelling? Is that right?
Yeah, I think the main intent when we had a lot of interest to add the ADU, obviously to add an ADU provision in our zoning ordinance when we updated it in 2014. It's been updated since, but predominantly it's just been technical amendments. In 2014, we really tried to accommodate what the request was. We call them mother-in-law suites, but we're not going to call that in our zoning ordinance. But so it's an accessory dwelling unit, and as I've mentioned before, there's specific criteria. Has to be integrated. The entrance has to come from within the primary residence. It can't be the primary access to the residence. The accessory dwelling unit residence cannot be from outside of the primary residence. So you can't have a second door, or a door, a second front door per se. And so really, I don't really see a scenario unless you're it doesn't lend itself to a rental unit. If is what I'm trying to get at. It's you're probably going to rent. You're not renting it. You're moving a parent, maybe a sick brother or sister, cousin. You're helping somebody out is really what you're trying to do, right? And if you're charging them rent, that's I guess that's your prerogative. But I don't really see a scenario where our definition of an accessory dwelling unit fits the mold of a rental unit because it's integrated. Your access is coming from within the home. You're probably more than likely not going to be renting it to somebody that you don't know.
Sure.
It
doesn't really meet the criteria that's kind of been established in the code, essentially.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Great. And then one last question. I know you're like in planning and enforcement, so this might not be your area of expertise, but just are there opportunities to expand the use of in types of ADUs in the future in Allen County? Do you see any upcoming opportunities?
So really what, based on your intro, really what you're about the only area would be to look at the allowance for detached accessory dwelling units, really which kind of complicates things because we have building codes that require minimum square footages for freestanding structures. And so, we'd have to look at that. Then we're looking at, lot size. It's possible that in the future we allow detached accessory dwelling units in the communities. Not in, like I said, in the rural area, we allow the second freestanding single family residences, which people are operating them as accessory dwelling units. But in the communities like Fort Wayne, detached accessory dwelling units currently exist in some fashion, but predominantly we don't have them, nor does the ordinance allow for them. Maybe if the demand rises to a point where we think that it's something we want to add to as a strategy and a comprehensive plan, or as an ordinance amendment to specifically allow the detached ones, or make modifications to the existing ADU. We're always looking at that stuff to better our ordinance. We've done it's since 2014, 3 or 4 technical amendments to our ordinance to better it. And that's the kind of thing that we'd look at. Maybe we need to adjust square footage, or a provision, a requirement for an EDU. Maybe that does change as the market changes. But we do look at the market and listen to what's needed. And we're currently undergoing a comprehensive plan amendment right now, and there's an opportunity there to incorporate alternative housing types, and this I would classify really an accessory dwelling unit as an alternative housing option from the traditional, right? I mean, you have typically a single family or a multifamily scenario, and to me, this is really a niche kind of a use. But I think as housing prices go up, as the cost of elderly care goes up, being able to provide living environment for the elderly within your a child's home, or may not even be a child, maybe it's a nephew or somebody. So it doesn't have to be immediate family, to be able to provide care in an environment that is safe and within the family, at a much lower cost, obviously, than the elderly care facilities. It's something that I think was one of the reasons why we added it to our zoning ordinance. And our hope is that people use it correctly, and we're able to provide for it. So.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Patrick, that's a great note to end on. I just want to thank you again for taking the time and talking to us, sharing your expertise, touching on how, the policy is framed and how that kind of relates to AARP's priorities. So
Sure.
Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
Okay, awesome. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that video, and I promise I've washed the shirt since that time, so no worries. Hey, Betsy, what did you think of the interview?
I really liked it. I had a couple of questions, and one of the things that I did notice is that I had a difficult time remembering and writing down the phone number to call them. I know that we got the website up on the screen, but if somebody wants to call the planning department, the Allen County Planning Department, that number is 260-449 7607. That's 260-449-7607. Thank you, Dan. So I know a lot of people would prefer just to call and have a conversation with somebody and ask, does this qualify? Do I need a variance to do this? Is this something that is allowed? So I think, just starting with a phone call might be a good way to begin the conversation.
Definitely. That is a great recommendation. Dan, our producer Dan, is in the background. Do we have any questions in the queue? Any from Facebook or live viewers? Okay, no questions yet. Folks, if you do have a question, though, or a comment, please go ahead and post those. We will try our best to answer them. And if you have a question that we can't answer today, as Betsy mentioned before the video, we can find that answer and make sure that that it is answered. Looks like we do have one. All right. If the ADU doesn't have its own entrance exit, is that not a safety issue in case of a fire or damage due to high winds? That's a great question. I definitely think that I'm only going to give how I see it, my opinion, how I see it. I think the idea behind the Allen County ADU is that it's essentially just another bedroom that you're putting on, but the bedroom has it has a sink, like a dining, area, or like a
Like a
cooking area.
you would be adding.
Yes, yes, yeah, and like a bathroom facility. So
Multiple exits. So you would still have probably a back door, or you might
mhm,
have a window exit, an emergency window exit option if you would want to. But I think that's a really good point, is that if you're dealing with somebody who has a disability and may have a difficult time exiting in case of fire or some kind of an issue, I would assume that it would be important to make sure that room is not only accessible, but that you could exit from it easily as well.
yeah, definitely. And I think ideally, at the minimum, I'd have to look at the model policy, which I'll reference in just a few moments. But I believe that a side entrance exit door is a good option as well. So as a side one, if the county or the jurisdiction does not permit a second front entrance. But that is it's a great point.
Yeah, good clarification. And I know that, again, going back to sort of having a conversation with them is, a lot of times that not only will they be able to, will your builder or, somebody who you're contracting with to assist you have some really good information on what's possible. They can certainly help guide you on what meets code, what meets the ADA code, what meets the fire code, the safety code, because you'll need to, certainly make sure that, for the safety of the people that you're caring for, that and convenience, that you cover all of those bases too. If you're planning on a DIY sort of thing, make sure that bone up, do more than just watch a YouTube video on how to do this, because there's a lot of pieces and parts that you need to know to do it well.
Yeah, and as you'll hear from our next speaker, pre-recorded video segment, um, her name is Amy Betty. She actually did contract with. She had a general contractor. She had an architect look at what she was hoping to do. She even worked with an attorney. So you'll hear more about that as well. So she consulted multiple experts in her ADU journey. But before we get to that, I do want to highlight one opportunity and two resources. So the opportunity is, as you heard Patrick Roos say, um, you know, there could be potential to expand the uses of ADUs and the types of ADUs in the future in Allen County. So I don't want that to be lost on the audience. He referenced that the All in Allen comprehensive planning process is underway right now. There was actually a meeting last night. There was a public meeting on that. So yeah, Dan plugged the website right there. So allinallen.org. If you're interested in housing choice and ADU specifically, go voice your opinion, share your feedback that maybe you want more types of ADUs permitted in Allen County. And this is a discussion that will continue, and AARP Indiana can always be a resource for you if you want more information on that.
One of the things that I picked up on, and maybe I misheard it, but it's what I thought I heard him say was that when we were talking about detached ADUs, that those are allowed in the rural areas, but not in the urban areas. And then
Right.
he also mentioned that different communities. So if you lived in Leo Cedarville or New Haven or something like that, or City of Fort Wayne, there would be different rules that you would need to follow as well. So it's not necessarily just um, making a change to the Allen County Comprehensive Plan, which is important, but then you may also need to advocate for a change in the rules of each of the individual communities that may have their own requirements as well. So depending on where you live, it will affect what you can do, right?
Yeah. Yeah, great point. And I didn't plug that about the agricultural districts in my opening. So thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, different rules for different jurisdictions. We're trying to streamline it for you folks. There's a lot of moving parts. Um, so a couple resources that I want to plug, AARP resources. The ABCs of ADUs is a livable communities guidebook all about ADUs, accessory dwelling units. It gives a really great comprehensive overview of those. You can find that at aarp.org/livable. You can also find our newly updated ADU state and local model policies. So these are policies that AARP has put their stamp of approval on for state governments, local governments. Just a menu of options to explore if you're looking at adopting an ADU policy. So without further ado, I don't think we have any more questions in this break. Betsy, do you want to introduce our next segment?
Yeah, well, actually, you sort of got an introduction. Nancy was listening in, and also helped us create this next segment, because one of the things that we thought about when we were talking about doing this program was, wouldn't it be nice to talk to somebody who's been through the process and hear it from the consumer perspective and not the regulator perspective? Because things that county officials say, "Oh, this is relatively easy to do," might be relatively difficult for you. Nancy, my good friend and also AARP member of our local group, and we'll put in a plug for our local group, because one of these days we're going to be able to meet again, and we have lots of fun. So
Oh yeah.
if you're interested in getting involved with AARP in Fort Wayne, you'll get to hang out with really cool folks like Nancy and I. Um, Nancy's neighbor, Amy, has gone through this process. And so they had a nice conversation, which just happened to be videotaped so that you can listen to it.
Yeah, definitely. And one quick note before we roll the tape, Amy is speaking from a caregiver perspective. We talked a little bit about that with Patrick, and I know that that's another one of ARP's huge priorities that we work on, caregiving. So just it's interesting how housing and caregiving overlaps, and you'll hear more about the human side of the personal perspective when developing an ADU. So without further ado, Dan, you can roll the tape.
Hi, this is Nancy Hanson in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and I am a volunteer for AARP, among other entities, and I'm here with my good friend Amy Beatty, whom I've known all my time here in Fort Wayne, 15 years. We're going to talk about accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, and Amy has personal experience with this. So one of my first questions for her was, your mother moved to your home. Uh, whose idea was that? Was it yours? Was it hers? A combination?
It was really mutual, because I grew up in a multi-generational home anyway. My grandparents were 70 and 79 when I was born, so I was never around anybody younger than that. And we went from a good old fashioned American four square house with one bathroom upstairs to building a half bath downstairs and making an addition to the main floor that became my grandmother's room when she could no longer do the stairs. And of course, wonderful agencies like Visiting Nurse Service existed back in the early 80s and would come in and help her with bathing and dressing and whatnot that at some point were beyond the scope of my mother, and I was 9 or 10 at the time. So I kind of grew up that way. So it was something that my mother and I had discussed in advance. And I always knew my mother's philosophy on aging, and we never were shy about discussing that aging process and ultimately the death process. So it became apparent after my mother had a pacemaker put in when she was about 78 that she physically was not able to live as successfully at home alone as she would like, even though we had seriously planned ahead. She lived in a ranch home 3 doors away from me, but my children were quite young at the time and about 8 and 10 years of age. And so it was very hard for me to think about maintaining a separate home, separate from my husband and I maintaining our own house. So that kind of really precipitated the move. And do you want me to tell you a little bit more about how that structurally came about,
Well,
logistic?
first of all, I'm curious because I know your kids and I know your husband. How did how did John and the children react to this? Were they part of the discussion, or did
Oh,
you
absolutely.
spring it on them?
Yeah, probably a little bit less so the kids, but obviously, it's not every amazing husband that has a good relationship with his mother-in-law anyway, or wife with her mother-in-law or father-in-law. So that was a huge part of the initial situation. Is the dynamic between them was good. It was not a difficult relationship. Um, we had also been through the same conversation about his father before his death, um, and that never came to fruition for us, but we both felt very strongly about it. She was the only living grandparent, and so it also was important to us from our children's standpoint that they grew up seeing grandma every day and grandma being a part of their lives. So
Right.
it was just kind of a natural continuation of our collective relationship.
Okay. Now, for those of you who are watching, listening, Amy's husband is a part of the genealogy team at the Allen County Public Library. Very good at what he does. So the grandparent thing, I think that makes a lot of sense to me
Yeah.
because ancestors are important in your
Yeah.
family. So
Yeah. Well,
um,
and for me, it was a natural continuation of the way I was raised anyway.
right,
So
right.
it just seemed like a natural fit for our family.
Now you live in an historic neighborhood
Correct.
south of downtown Fort Wayne. Beautiful old house
Correct.
that's got a we have a staircase to the second floor.
Well, and also every bit of that house is original to 1928 and
Oh
is
my.
individually designated as a local historic district.
Okay.
So we dealt with a few specifics regarding not only the physical structure of the house, but the historic nature of the property when we considered our addition.
So did you have to get approval from the neighborhood association?
No, not at all from the neighborhood association.
Okay.
We chose to list our house as an individual historic district
Okay.
when we purchased it. So we did have to pass the Historic Preservation Review Board in Fort Wayne because the addition to the property had to be compliant with the current historic structure. But between, my being an amateur historian and my being married to a historian, that was actually our desire anyway. We were also very fortunate that a neighbor down the street, Matt Wiedenhoft, was an architect with the firm of Martin Riley Mock, and they are well trained in ADA compliant structures. So this was a challenge that he took on greatly. Our builder was actually my backdoor neighbor, Sam Lipscomb, who had a company at the time, Witchet Remodeling, and had also, been versed with doing some things that were, elderly accommodation situations. So it just made a lot of sense, and it was very fortunate for us to have that all come together. We talked extensively about our own desires for the house apart from its exterior compliant facade. And so we had no problems getting through any of that permission. We actually made a 25-foot addition onto the rear of the house. And if I may, I'd tell you a little bit more about that whole.
Sure. Sure.
First and foremost, if anybody is considering doing that, obviously everyone's neighborhood association is different. We live in an older area of town, so we don't have HOAs and, heavy covenant restrictions. Ours were of a different nature, being historic, but I honestly feel that there are neighborhood associations, having been a former mayor's office employee, that have greater restrictive covenants than you would encounter through historic designation restriction. So that may be something that you as an individual wanting to do a similar thing may be well advised to start with your neighborhood association. That didn't apply to us.
Good point.
Also, I would recommend from the very, very beginning that you each have an attorney to guide you through the process. Just because you have a wonderful parent-child relationship, just because you all have the best interests at heart, I would also advocate protecting both parties from the outset, because what you're essentially doing is asking your parent to change role reversals with you, which is
Right.
We can have a little conversation in a minute about the whole emotional and responsible relationship.
Did your mother have to change her will when you all did this?
No, but I'm an only family, so it didn't really matter. And my mother had anything to leave, which is actually part of the reason we did this, is because my mother was never financially well off. I well knew the cost of nursing home care or a continuum of care where you go in as a retirement facility and progress to full skilled nursing care if you need it. And the cost to be in a facility can be,
it's high.
$90 a year or more.
Yeah, my mother's in a nursing home now, and it's
That's
pricey.
Total of my mother's assets.
Yeah. So
so it was important to us to get a good legal structure for each of us. It was important to us to research how that agreement would be drawn up, because my mother was selling her own home and investing that in the build in our home, which of course gave her, 6 more years before Medicaid than if she'd just gone into a nursing home. But it also meant making sure that we drew up a sort of a contract of rights for her as part home ownership, because even though she was in her 80s, that doesn't guarantee that John and I and the children would not have predeceased her.
that's right. That's true.
Important if I go out and get hit by a bus, I don't want my mother to be on the sidewalk because My name and my husband's name were on the real estate, not my mother's.
So was she added to the ownership of your home then? No,
Nope, it
no.
was our attorneys drew up a sort of separate um, living arrangement akin to, let's say, if you put your home in a um, trust for your spouse, but you actually
Okay.
decease your spouse, you have the right of survivorship, even though that real estate may revert ultimately to the trust. You're allowed to live there as long as you're still living,
Okay.
even if you physically own the house yourself. So we did something that was akin to that. And of course, that's a conversation you would want to have extensively with an attorney and not take my word for it.
Did someone come in and care for your mother then during the day while you were working and John was working, or
You're looking at her.
pardon?
You're looking at her.
You're looking at her. Okay.
You're look-
Um,
Yeah.
so you did everything to help her as far as bathing and cooking and cleaning and all of that?
Was first off, it was a blessing because she could be part of our family. She was not completely physically disabled, but she had a lot of physical challenges, plus just personal stamina, energy, etc. So we were able, to eat together as a family. So she did not have to do cooking. She was quite capable of putting together her own breakfast or lunch or whatever. She was also quite capable of getting, to the bathroom, however slowly. But we did make sure that that room was a self-contained facility, everything all on one floor. Because mother and I had traveled, we chose to put in floor radiant heat because we have a boiler system. And that gave her her own room with her own heat settings, her own controls, and the idea that as you age, you frequently have a situation where someone feels colder, they're less active, their body fat diminishes, their skin thins, and that way she could control her own personal environment. Um, that actually was a win-win because she slipped off the toilet once at 11:30 at night and we didn't know it until the next morning. She said, "Oh, that was fine. The floor was warm. I was warm. It was okay." So, but that was my mother. But we made sure it was an ADA compliant bathroom, and
Yeah.
both our architect and our builder were extremely helpful with those things. We designed it so it was just a flush roll-in shower. They built it with a custom designed and sculpted, um, you know, concrete pan for the shower. All the implements are, we were easily able to build in, the grab bars and the adjustable height shower head. And we chose not to have a seat built in, but use a bath chair because that way, if she had gotten to the point where she was physically unable to get herself around on a walker or with some assistance, we could physically just roll in a
A wheelchair.
wheelchair or a Hoyer lift, because you can get a patient lift that also will have a sling on it that is a just a fine mesh. So if you have truly a bedridden patient, you can move them in a sling. We had extra heat in the bathroom, so there again, you're bathing an elderly patient, or a disabled person, not necessarily elderly at all. You don't want them to chill while you're doing all that. Elevated toilet, grab bars all over the place, wide doors. We put in a pocket door to the bathroom so that there again, if you're going in a walker or wheelchair, there was just a little lever and it wasn't even recessed that was hard to get out, but just a lever that you could just pull the door together. You could have tied a string on it if that was easier. All the door handles were levers, everything that we could do, plugs at levels that she could reach, switches at levels she could reach.
So you really thought through this whole process of,
Yeah, but I grew up with it, so I
well,
saw it was to not have those things.
but
And
for somebody who has not lived with grandparents, it would be good to consciously go
Yeah.
through your
And
house and
and that's
see.
why I
Yeah,
would recommend also, you know, working with an architect. Don't be afraid to spend the money on a good architect, because it is an investment in you. It's an investment in your future, as well as your current elderly or physically challenged individual that you're caring for.
right. And I
I
had,
don't have to move when I'm 90 because I can live in my own house because
right.
I've already designed all of that.
And that's something that that I think is a part of this conversation, is that more and more I think you're going to see families moving back together,
Yeah.
because of finances as much as anything. So if there's a place where that mom can move into or dad can move into, and then the children take over the main house, that makes a lot of sense.
Right. Right.
Um, how your mother has passed on, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
How long did she live with you?
She was with us for 6 years.
For 6 years. Okay. And you all did something really interesting with that space after she died. Can you
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit? Because my
I
husband
have,
reminded me the other night.
yeah, I have a borrowed daughter from China. She was an exchange student at my children's school. She just graduated this past year and will be a freshman at University of Michigan, and my daughter will be a senior in high school. But it was wonderful because it gave her her own space without having to be, shoved into a new family and shoved into, somebody else's room and try and get along with all that. She had her own space and her own bathroom. It's great for us because we've got, if we want to have guests, we have a nice little ensuite unit for them where you can go and have your own privacy and don't have to feel like you're in the way. And when nobody else is using it, it's my office. So
Oh, good idea.
yeah,
Yeah, great idea. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it worked out. It worked out well all around. But I mean, my gosh, I'm only 53. But heck, heaven forbid I had to have knee surgery. Well, jeepers, now I own a wheelchair and a shower chair, and I can be all on one floor. And I would not have any qualms at all. I bought a medical bed for my mother so that she could get in and out of bed. She never wanted a lift chair, but we made sure that all of the furniture was, good, sturdy, yet comfortable furniture, higher rather than lower, and with good arms so she could get herself up and down easily. No throw rugs. It's just a tile floor, so it's easy movement. And the in-floor radiant heat, I couldn't say enough about because, I'd be hot and my mother'd be freezing. I mean, I knew it was over 90 when my mother took a sweater off.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So looking at kind of as a recap of what you said, first of all, you need to really think about who's moving in, what their needs are, and then do some research as to who's going to
Yeah.
design the
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
and get attorneys involved so that legally everybody's protected.
Your attorney, your banker, any independent party that you want so that both sides are protected.
Right.
And one more thing I would say about that, because we don't often take into consideration the psychological and emotional component of this. It's really important to have a good and open relationship with each other because you are doing a partial role reversal.
Right.
You have to make sure that your parent is not going to take over parenting your children in a way that you don't want. You want to make sure that you retain your parents' psychological, emotional independence as much as possible and not treat them like a child. You want to have everybody in the house be prepared for, how does that aging process look? What happens with death? What happens with um with getting beyond a physical capability that maybe you could handle in the home?
Yeah.
My mother moved the last about 6 months to a nursing home because it was a point at which it was deciding to close my 10-year business of an estate sale company because I couldn't juggle my children who were not even old enough to drive, and run a business and care for my mother after she had, major colon surgery. And we had to get to a point where I could say, I can't get up 7 times a night to change the bed or to get you to the bathroom in time, or whatever, and continue to do other things. And that was hard because I never wanted her to go to that point. But also, unfortunately, from an insurance standpoint, insurance doesn't pay at this point for a lot of in-home care. So have a backup plan too, because physical challenge may exceed your scope of in-home care. And if you need help with that, how do you pay for it?
Right.
Does it? How do you feel about having someone else in your home? And do you have a way to separate that space? Do the two of you, between your parent and yourself, have an understanding of emotional and somewhat physical boundaries between each other? Because no matter how much you love your mother, you still want your own space.
That's right. And I think that is a key to all of it.
Yeah.
And also for people, like, I just recently had a birthday that kind of shocked me. I didn't realize I was that old. If you're part of the boomer generation, start thinking about, so what are you going to do when you're 85, 90 years old? I mean,
Yeah.
how's your life going to be? So, Amy, this has been really interesting, and I hope we get together in person soon, because we haven't seen each other except at a funeral in the last couple of years. So this is Nancy Hansen with AARP in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I thank you so much. Great information. Thank you.
A lot more to consider, but I would definitely never regret doing it. So good luck. Reach out if you have personal questions. I'm happy to take your phone calls or your emails or whatever and tell you how it is. So good, bad, ugly, and in between, but mostly it was pretty darn good.
That's good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Amy. I appreciate your advocating for what's going to be all of our generation at some point.
That's right. Thanks.
Okay, take care. Bye.
All right. All I can say after that conversation is, wow, that was so thoughtful and far-reaching in what it covered. What did you think, Betsy?
I really liked it too. I thought it was really nice to focus on the personal, the interpersonal relationships. I know a lot of times people thinking about ADUs, they're like, oh, well, we got to get construction permits. But there's so much to think about ahead of time. Do you really want to live with this person for however many years? And how's that going to work? And certainly it would be a much more pleasant living experience for everybody if you think those things through a little bit better from the get-go.
Yeah, 100%. Very, very thoughtful. A lot of things to consider. While the interview was playing, I just wrote down several things that ARP cares about that they touched on. It wasn't just ADUs. It was the caregiver perspective, estate planning. They talked about home modifications, which is part of our home fit work through our livable communities department. Talked about the benefits of an ADU. Even if you don't have an aging loved one living with you, like intergenerational living with the exchange student, and short-term disability. Like if anyone is can be susceptible to short-term disability.
Mental health.
Definitely. So
That,
yeah.
And loneliness and isolation.
Yes.
And all of those things that that go into an age-friendly community and a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quickly, we're about to wrap up here because we're just approaching the hour mark. Do we have any closing questions from our audience or comments? If not, I just want to let everyone know that this video will live on the AARP Indiana Facebook page. I want to remind viewers that, if you watch this later and you have a topic that you're curious about related to ADUs, put it in the comments section. We'll check back on this video and it will give us some, we want to listen to our audience and be able to explore further issues and get you the information that you want. just want to plug that one opportunity and those 2 resources one more time. So if you live in Allen County in Indiana, they are redoing their comprehensive plan. They're updating it. So go to the website allinallen.org. Look at more information on that, because
Whole
that's
section on housing.
yes, an entire section on housing and ADUs is part of that conversation. So
And all the rest of
um,
the sections are important too, because it's about transportation and
Definitely.
land use planning and accessibility, and so
Mhm.
it's good stuff.
Yeah, it all relates. That is such a good point. And then also the 2 AARP resources, the ABCs of ADUs and the new ADU state and local model policies. You can find those both at aarp.org/livable. Just go to that link and you should be able to find those. And I just want to thank everyone for your interest in this topic and for joining us today. Thank you, Betsy, for joining. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. This was very interesting.
Thank you. All right, folks, we'll talk to you next time.